Hi, this is Dave Stipe, and you're listening to Mike Delivers with Mike Biseglia. I met Mike Biseglia many years ago when we were both working together for the Virginia Sports Radio Network. I was the on-site radio engineer for the basketball team, and Mike was our in-studio host.
We begin in the Atlantic Coast Conference, where a blowout from Chapel Hill, the 8th-ranked North Carolina Tar Heels, beat NC State for the 11th straight time, 74-55. Monster game from Tyler Zeller, who finished with 21 points and a career-high 17 rebounds.
And we got to know each other over the airwaves, actually, producing those games together. And one of the things that we learned is we have very different sports tastes, as I am from Boston and he is from New York. But that said, while I do hope my Celtics come out and win out the East, I do wish his Brooklyn Nets, and especially our guy, Joey Buckets, luck this year in the tournament down in the bubble.
Welcome inside. Mike delivers from his wife's 2017 Toyota RAV4. Here's your host, Mike Biseglia.
That's right, this is Mike Delivers, episode number 101. And I'm your host, Mike Biseglia. And I'm coming to you from my wife's 2017 Toyota RAV4. I'm currently outside of the Starbucks in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I've done 1,217 deliveries. I also have a 98% satisfaction rating as an Uber Eats driver. You can find this podcast on Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, and on Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple, please go ahead and give a 5-star rating. Also, leave a comment. And if you do leave a comment, I will read it at the end of a Mike Delivers podcast. I'll be reading some at the end of this episode as well. Make sure you guys check out the O'Brien Creative Group. They're the guys that made my awesome-looking logo. They do logo design, website creation, and brand identity for all your social media matters. If you need more information on them, just click on my show notes, o'briencreativegroup.com. All their information is right there. The Mike Delivers podcast Patreon page continues to grow, and I'll continue to plug it because I appreciate all of everybody that's been going to it and supporting it. It's been tremendous. If you go to patreon.com or on your phone, get the Patreon app, type in Mike Delivers, you can become a Patreon subscriber to this podcast. You get bonus content, bonus videos, bonus episodes. You can find out how I crashed my wife's 2007 Toyota RAV4. And a big part of that Patreon page that people seem to love is the blind food taste test, where my wife puts her pantyhose around my eyes. She then feeds me food, and I have to guess what it is. You can find all those videos on my Patreon page. It costs $4 a month. And all of that goes back into this podcast to continue the support, all the different foods that we try. We use that money to help build this podcast. So anything you can to support it is greatly appreciated. Even if you just want to give $1 to the page, you can do that too. And just to help support the Mike Delivers podcast. So thank you guys. A couple of big topics for the pod this week. I want to get into driving now, knowing that I'm going to see the tip before I get the order. I'll explain some of that. It sounds confusing. Basically, the bottom line is I see the amount of tip I'm getting before the whole order is completed, before picking up the food, before dropping it off. It's wild. I'll get into a little bit of that. I've got some stories from the road to share, and then a fun interview as well that I'm really excited to share with everybody. It's with Pablo Goldstein. He started this blog called Goldstein and Gasol. He's a die-hard Lakers fan and a big food guy as well. But what makes him super cool and interesting, as well as being just a great person, is he created a blog, Goldstein and Gasol, where he recreated and tried the foods from the 1985 Los Angeles Lakers championship cookbook. So basically, he's having Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's paella. He recreated it, he tried it, and in his blog, he goes into all the details about it. It was inspired by Julia and Julia, the movie that's out there, if you've seen, where this woman recreates Julia Child's all her meals. It became a movie, fancy dancy there. So this is kind of a take on that, trying all the dishes from the 1985 LA Lakers championship cookbook, recreating them. I'll talk to Pablo about those, which ones he liked, which ones he didn't like, and then we'll get into some of the Uber Eats stuff as well. So before we get to stories from the road, I want to talk about this because it's fascinating. The way Uber Eats has now changed their gimmick is you know what the tip's basically going to be before you accept an order, which is wild because in the past, if you were driving along and it said, oh, McDonald's, here's the order, it's projected to give you $5. That was the amount that you would get for the order, and then the tip would come after, and it was just hit or miss. You would see what happened. But now you're getting the money come in, and it'll say something like $8 for the McDonald's, and that includes the projected tip. So you now know what kind of tip you're getting. And I haven't decided yet if I like this or don't like it. But what it has created is you really have to do some really quick mental math in your head and decide if the order is worth taking. There's no more risk involved. Well, there's still risk involved, but there's no more of that like risky factor of, is this going to be a good or bad tip? And the anxiety and the pressure of to do a good job. Because, I mean, if you know beforehand what the tip's going to be, I mean, that can either motivate you or unmotivate you to do a good job. So I'm fascinated by why Uber Eats has decided to go down this road. I've heard, as we talked to many people on the Mike Delivers podcast, that other platforms have been doing this model. So I guess Uber Eats is starting to copy it. But I'm curious, and this question for you guys as well. You're listening to this podcast. If you know that your pre-tip is there and that the delivery driver is going to have a sense of what it is, does that change your thought process and how you want to tip? For example, I see an order come in and it's a shit tip. I'm like, I'll pass on this delivery based on the time and distance, and this person's not tipping well, I'm not going to take it. So I'm curious, if you're a person that's ordering food, is it going to take longer for you to get your food to your house because you didn't tip and nobody's accepting that order, which will then motivate you to tip more? I don't know. It's a whole chicken and an egg thing here. So I definitely need more clarity on it. So I'm going to try to get some people on this podcast to go into that. It's confusing. Is this good or is this bad? I mean, clearly Uber Eats is copying off the other platforms, so they must think this works overall for everybody. But I'm curious too, from a consumer perspective, do you like it? From a driver perspective, do you like it? And is it helping to make just more money overall? I don't know. I still have a lot of questions about it. But when I'm on the wheel and I see it come in, it does dictate if I'm going to take or not take somebody's order. And I think for content purposes on the podcast, I always enjoyed knowing or not knowing what the tip was. I think it made for an excitement level. Oh, here comes the tip. What's it going to be? Now you kind of know. And then the other part is, could the person give a tip, get you to come to their house because you know that it's a good tip, and then change it after? You could screw with people. So there's that element of it as well. This whole tip thing is fascinating to me. We will continue to go down this road on the topic of it because it's going to continue to come up. We'll get some experts on here too to talk about tipping in the new way of Uber Eats. Just fascinates me completely. All right, we've got an interview coming up with Pablo Goldstein, a little bit about his blog, Goldstein and Gasol, talk about the 1985 Lakers Cookbook. But before all that, let's get to stories from the road. So let me start you off with a story about tips. Whenever you accept an order, you get to see notes. They're from the customer to you. And the note here said, please leave the food at the door at apartment number 1049. There is a tip waiting for you, cash tip waiting for you on the door. You read this. I'm like, this is great. Cash tip on the door. Let's go. Drive around, get to the apartment complex, have a hard time finding the entrance. It was kind of weird. The instructions were a little strange. It said, go under the Home Sweet Home sign in pink. Totally missed it. Completely went overshot it. That's because the GPS took me to the wrong location. Figured it out. Asked a nice young couple where to go. They told me the right spot. Ran up the street. Went into the building. Got past security. All set to go. Walked down the hall. And there's apartment 1049. And I look at the door. And what do you think I don't see on the door? No cash tip. You know what the problem is? People leave notes from previous deliveries, and they don't realize that they're leaving those notes still on their app. I've seen this all the time. Hey, please ask for extra ketchup. I ordered from a Chinese restaurant. Hey, please get me extra soy sauce. I'm picking up from McDonald's. So my PSA to you guys is, please change the note section because I got teased. I got excited. I thought I was going to see a cash tip on the door. And it turned out that I got a tip on the app later, electronically, for $1 fucking. Update to some of the nasty foods that smell when I'm in the car. We have a new contender for number 1. It's omelets from IHOP. Nasty. So I love to hear stories from the road from some of my delivery driver friends. One of them is my guy Gerald, and he is in the New Orleans area, and he met a fuzzy little friend on one of his deliveries.
So I get an order to, order Cajun seafood restaurant, and I pull up and, getting ready to walk in, and what do I see right by the front door? A big raccoon. Now, if you don't know anything about raccoons, they some mean creatures. So I was kind of hesitant to walk into the door. So he was about 5 feet away from me. And I just walked in and I was just waiting for him to plunge at me. But he just watched me walk in like he was a person. And once I get in there, I asked the lady, I said, y'all know y'all have a raccoon out there? She said, yeah, he's always out there. He just waits for the food from the customers. I'm like, wow, that doesn't seem too safe. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. First time experiencing something like that in almost 2,000 deliveries.
Did deliveries on a rainy Sunday. And a rainy Sunday means a lot of money for me. A couple of reasons why. In the pandemic, you can't eat inside restaurants anymore. Everything is outside seating. So with rain, outside, Sunday, feeling lazy, there's going to be a lot of deliveries. My first pickup on Sunday was to an IHOP. And I was stunned to see people eating outside of the IHOP on a rainy Sunday. There were tents set up. But what made this so amazing was the tents were flying away in the rain, people working to get the tents to stay still, and guys and gals just eating under these tents that were flying away, eating their pancakes in the rain. Like, who cared? A Sunday at IHOP in the rain? Mad props to you guys. You heard what my thoughts were on the omelet. Now a little manager incompetence. Wendy's and McDonald's. I saw both managers there have no clue what they're doing, no idea how Uber Eats works, and pretty much being clueless. But I have to say, it's pretty funny when the employees at both Wendy's and McDonald's are showing their managers what to do. Maybe the manager should be the employee and the employee should be the manager. All right, those are the stories from the road from this past week. Let's get to the interview portion of this podcast. Excited to bring on Pablo Goldstein. He is the writer, the cook, the chef of Goldstein and Gasol. 1985 Championship Lakers Cookbook. He recreated 82 recipes. He is a die-hard Lakers fan, and I am pumped to talk to him. Enjoy, everybody. All right, it's the Mike Delivers podcast, and excited to have on Pablo Goldstein. He's got one of the coolest blogs I have ever seen. And as a basketball fan and a food fan, this resonated with me right away. It's Goldstein and Gasol. He is a diehard Lakers fan, and we'll get into this blog, which is super cool. Gets into the LA Lakers history, going into the details of this season, which has been just bizarre. And then the wacky part of this whole thing is it's food recipes taken in the cookbook from the 1985 Lakers world champion Lakers Are Cookin' Family Cookbook, which is just wild. So, Pablo, thanks for hopping on the Mike Delivers podcast, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right. First things first, I'm going to surprise you with something. I like went into my closet. This is like the bin where I'm not allowed. Like, this is the bin where my wife took all my shit and she put it in here and she said, this can never be shown to public. So I went in the bin and I got this. And this is a ticket. Let's see this. This is the 2002 Nets-Lakers Game 3 NBA Finals. The Lakers killed the Nets. That was a dreadful series, but that Nets team still holds a lot in my heart. So I wanted to show you that just so you could see my real Nets fandom here. And then talk about you. I mean, so you've just been a Lakers fan your whole life?
Yeah. I mean, I'm born and raised here in LA, big Dodgers and Lakers fan. but especially the NBA in general. I just love the NBA. I mean, I could really watch like two mid-tier teams. You know, I'll find the fun in anything, in any NBA game.
Yeah.
But really, it's the Lakers that I'm a diehard of.
What was it? I mean, I guess. See, like for me, it's interesting because I'm a Nets fan. So growing up, especially when they were in New Jersey, it was like there's the Nets and then there's the Knicks. So it's like, why in the hell would you like the Nets? Everybody likes the Knicks. Were you, when you were growing up, was someone like, we got the Lakers, we got the Clippers, and it was just like, it's the Lakers. Like I guess two parts. One, I'm curious, how the hell does anybody even become a Clipper fan back like 20, 30 years ago? And then what was it that made you the Laker guy?
To answer the first question, there really wasn't much, obviously, to make people become a Clippers fan until 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, to age myself, I'm 31, so I grew up in the height of the Shaq and Kobe era.
Yeah.
So of course I'm going to become a fan of them. Going to games at the Forum, going to games at the Staples Center. I still remember, being driven by my mom down the 110 and seeing that slowly start to rise out of downtown. And yeah, I mean, growing up, the Clippers were just a joke. It wasn't a rivalry, we hated the Kings, we hated the Celtics, right. But when you met a Clippers fan, it's like, are you related to Billy Crystal? Why are you a Clippers fan? And then in recent years, I've really noticed, because I work in entertainment, almost like 90% of TV writers who move to LA become Clippers fans.
Interesting.
It's a very odd phenomenon. It definitely coincided with the Lob City era of the Clippers. Yeah. And it certainly didn't hurt that Blake Griffin was basically like a comedy writer / actor for a solid 5 years.
That's fascinating because I look at it from the other perspective. Like the Net Nick, I think, is kind of similar-ish, where now it's like, and this kind of bothers me as a Nets fan because I'm like a real Nets fan. I'm like, I went to see Kenny Anderson and Derek Coleman, and it's like, all of a sudden it's like the poser thing to be like, the Brooklyn Nets are cool. And I'm like, the Brooklyn Nets the Nets are cool? Like that still weirds me out to even say out loud.
It is weird. I mean, you probably made the right choice because I'm sure growing up, the Knicks still had this aura of, this great franchise, even though they were, even though they hadn't won in a minute. But after the 90s, it's been this nightmare. And even though the Nets haven't really done anything since as well, it's, I think you've made the right choice.
I appreciate that. You validate that for me. That feels good. And yes, they've been a nightmare. They can stay a nightmare, and that would be awesome for me.
Yeah, right. I mean, the Knicks are one of those franchises where I'm like, I give any Knicks fan a pass if they want to, as an adult, move to another team. Like, being a Dodgers fan, and when Frank McCourt owned the team for a hot minute, it was like, oh my God, am I going to be stuck with Frank McCourt for 30, 40 years?
Yeah. When
you have a bad owner, it's limitless how bad your sports watching enjoyment can be.
Yeah, there's always a new low, and I'm a Mets fan, so I understand what new lows in ownership can be. Like today, Jacob deGrom was scratched, and you're just like, what? Please God, like what is the news? And it's not nothing terrible, then knock on wood. But like with the Mets, it's just new ways to find lows. Like Cespedes has gone missing. Marcus Stroman now is opting out, and I could go into hours on what it's like being a Mets fan. So I'm with you though. Like the dread of just a bad ownership, the Wilpons, it's the worst.
Oh my God! Yeah, and you can't do anything about it, especially when they have no self-awareness, like a James Dolan or
right.
Yeah.
The lack of self-awareness part is what kills me. All right, so I want to get into the blog. Goldstein and Gasol, and it's inspired by the Julia and Julia collection of 82 recipes, and you basically recreate on the blog, taking the recipes, you cook them, you eat them. Before we get into some of the recipes and what you did with that, how does your brain make the connection of, here's Julia and Julia, here's the 1985 Lakers cookbook, maybe I should do this? Like, what was that thought process like?
Well, a couple of years ago, I bought the aforementioned cookbook, the 1985 World Champion Lakers Are Cooking Family Cookbook, which is one of those classic, especially in the 80s, a lot of championship teams like the Chicago Bears in 85, they put together these cookbooks featuring recipes from, the players, owners, the wives, the front office, etc. And I bought this on eBay just because I love collecting esoteric Dodgers and Lakers stuff. But then as I was looking at it, I kind of got this idea to essentially rip off Julie Powell's Julie and Julia, which you mentioned. For listeners who don't know, that was a 2002 blog and 2009 movie starring Meryl Streep and Amy Adams about this woman who started a blog because she hated the way her life was going. And she decided to cook all 526, I believe, recipes in Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And she did all of that in 365 days. The blog became a big hit, book, all that, etc. So my idea was just like, Anthony Davis just got traded to the Lakers. This is going to be a very momentous season for the Lakers and the NBA in general.
Right.
I mean, the Lakers are going to probably make the playoffs for the first time in almost a decade. I did say that, of course, and I had no idea that this would be the most momentous NBA season in history for many other reasons, like Kobe Bryant's death and coronavirus and the Orlando bubble. But yeah, so I decided to write 82 blog pieces for each game. I took 82 recipes from players, wives, front office, celebrities like Jack Nicholson that you'd expect, all the way down to D-list celebs. The book is fantastic. The only thing is the recipes themselves are not very fantastic.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at some of them and like they look. A lot of them just look terrible. Like, I mean, I'm just looking at this. Like, I'll give an example of one: the Gail Goodrich broccoli and cheese casserole. Like that to me, I saw that and I was like, "There's nothing. I would never, in my wildest dreams, make a broccoli and cheese casserole." Was it? I saw the pictures online. You can check out the blog and you can see it. And I know you've done a lot of these, so maybe you don't remember it exactly. But when you think back to that cheese casserole, what comes to your mind?
The funny thing about that one, what comes to mind is that was the last recipe I cooked before the 3-month-long hiatus. Right. But actually, that was one of the few that I didn't mind. I think it's so simple in its like kind of middle America 1950s grossness that it makes for a not too shabby side dish. It was, I think I can pull it up. I mean, it was just, what was it, broccoli and casserole. It was just kind of like a mediocre macaroni and cheese.
Gotcha.
There was much worse broccoli dishes. There was one dish in particular by Mitch Chortkoff. And Mitch Chortkoff was called the dean of the Lakers press corps. And he wrote about the Lakers for pretty much every LA newspaper from 1960 when they came to LA to I think 2017 when he died. And his recipe was broccoli. Let's see what it was. It was just called chicken and broccoli.
Yeah.
And I was making it. It was pretty standard. You know, I baked some chicken. I put it in a casserole dish. I added frozen broccoli because the recipe demanded frozen broccoli, not fresh broccoli. And I added, some of like a classic supermarket seasoning packet, some sour cream, mixed it all together. It wasn't too bad. And then I added the final ingredient, which was whipped cream. So I added whipped cream, mixed it all together, baked it for about 40 minutes, took it out, and it was one of the most vile things I've ever eaten. I took one bite, put it away. The next morning, I woke up with shooting back pain. And I thought, oh my God, this thing is killing me. Later found out it was my first kidney stone. But the dish was so bad, I thought Goldstein and Gasol had killed me.
That's unbelievable. And that actually follows up well because I was reading some of these posts and then I saw about your trying to make the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's paella. And one of the problems you wrote about it was because of the kidney stones and sodium intake that you were dreading and were anxious then about what to do with that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar paella.
Yeah, I was very scared to do that because I checked in with my doctor the morning before the night I cooked it. And he was like, basically, you got to start drinking like 100 ounces of water a day, cut out as much salt as possible, cut out animal protein if you can. And then I opened up the recipe for the night and it was literally every meat, poultry, and fish you could think of, including shrimp, clams, lobster, haddock, beef, chicken, love Kareem, one of my favorite Lakers and players, human beings of all time. But in comparing it to other paella recipes that I've looked at, he was missing a lot of key ingredients, and it was just a very dry paella.
Did you tell your doctor, like, hey, I appreciate the advice and your, concern for me having a good, the healthy life, but I've got this Lakers blog I'm doing right now, so I gotta have to make Kareem's paella tonight.
I had to do it, and once you make a paella, it's very time intensive.
Yeah, right.
It's like 2 hours later, and I'm starving, and I'm like, all right, I got to eat this full bowl because otherwise I'm driving to McDonald's. I might as well eat this.
Did you? So when you went the process of the order of all these different recipes, did you just go page 1 and all the way in the back, or did you figure out an order that you wanted to do based on the recipes you saw in the book?
I just made a huge, complicated spreadsheet. I plugged in 82 I wanted to just have a good mix of people.
Right.
Like I was, of course, going to have I think it was 12 or 15 Lakers on that roster.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to include pretty much every former Laker who contributed, most of the Laker wives, because they're the ones who put the book together, because it was
Sure.
a charitable purchase that went to underprivileged kids in Inglewood. And I wanted to make sure, the front office was taken care of, coaches, celebrities, and then started adding in like politicians. Oh, this one's interesting. I want to include Mayor Tom Bradley because that will allow me to write about the LA riots. I want to include Inglewood Mayor, I forget his name at the time, but it would allow me to talk about modern day gentrification in Inglewood.
Right.
And so I just wanted to make sure that there was a good variety of everything. I mean, I wanted like Magic Johnson to be first because it's
Magic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Magic. No explanation needed.
Sure, Magic, yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't like 2 weeks straight of like people no one had ever heard of, because some of the recipes included were by people I had never heard of or people I couldn't even find information about in Googling.
Was there a dish you were skeptical of trying and then you ended up trying it and you were like, you know what? That wasn't that bad.
Yeah, actually. There was a recipe by sports writer Thomas Bonk. I interviewed him actually for his piece. He was a writer. He covered the Laker beat for the LA Times. And his recipe was a quiche sombrero. And I'm not the biggest fan of eggs. Number one, I'm not the biggest fan of eggs. Number two, a lot of the Mexican food in this book, it being 1980s and a lot of like white people, it's not the most authentic Mexican food. Right. And then a quiche, I didn't know if I had even tried one before, but I made it and I was like blown away. It was I don't know why it's a quiche sombrero. I think because there's jalapenos in it.
Gotcha.
Other than that,
right. Well, why not?
Yeah, I did a count of the recipes in this book. There's 82, obviously.
Yeah. And
not counting the desserts, which were more or less pretty good, I think there was like a grand total of 6 that I would make again.
Okay, 6.
So I think people
not
should check
terrible.
out not terrible, but people should check out the blog more for the stories and the interviews than, oh, this will be a great place to find some new recipes.
No, totally, exactly. I will say this, and this, if people of this podcast know this, I hate eggs. I think they're disgusting.
Oh, really?
I know that's like a small part of the population even thinks that. I think they're repulsive. The only time I actually can put eggs down is if they're in like fried rice and they're in there and they're kind of like with the dish. That I'm okay with, but I hate eggs, and it's like refreshing to hear somebody else say that. Like it like makes my ego feel a little bit better and understand. I hate eggs.
So you don't like them in any form. There's so many ways.
No, like the dippy egg, the runny egg, the hard boiled egg. Gives me nightmares to think about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with eggs. I mean, they're more like utilitarian to me. Like I'll eat an egg in the morning because it will provide a little bit of strength and energy, and my coffee won't make me feel crazy.
Right.
Other than that, I'm not like, but I don't know. I mean, maybe this book will change my life because I love the quiche, but some of them were not as great. I mean, I don't know if you saw Jack Nicholson's recipe. It's simply scrambled eggs.
Right. It's like
it's like crack egg into bowl, add milk, stir,
cook, eat. Jack Nicholson eggs, bingo. How difficult? Like I'm not a baker, so I'm curious if you are. Like these desserts, were they difficult to make?
Some were. I I forget what the first baked good I made for this was, but I remember writing that I had never really baked a pie, never baked
Right.
a cake. I'm a decent cook. Like I cook a lot, but I never really baked anything. And by the end of this, I think I'm pretty decent. I made, so Jerry West, I wrote 6 entries for him.
Mm-hmm.
He had, I think, like 10 recipes, and one of them was a cheesecake. And it was just super arduous to make. Took like 2 days, but it was fantastic.
2-day Jerry West cheesecake. It's unbelievable. Yeah, the baking would definitely that would scare me. Now correct me if I'm wrong. You have a girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
So has she been involved in eating this with you?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Pretty much since October, I've been making, averaging about 3 to 4 recipes a week.
It's crazy.
And if they're a dinner, then I'm praying that they're good and that we can both share it. But, there's probably about a 50% hit rate where I would make something and I would taste it and I'd just be like,
no,
let's get takeout. I'm sorry.
Right.
I gotta toss this.
What's your overall impressions from, well, I guess these recipes were from previous dates, so not exactly this question, but your overall impressions of cuisine from 1985.
Well, the funny thing about it being cuisine from 1985 is that it really is more cuisine from the 50s.
Right.
In my introductory post, before I even got into it, I wrote that I was hoping that this would be kind of like an eye-opener into modern LA cuisine, because the 80s is when like sushi was introduced to California and the California roll was created, when like Mexican food became more mainstream in America and started kind of replacing the hamburger as like the staple dish, at least here in LA.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was just a lot of casseroles. I was hoping there'd be more like better Southern food from the players, because a lot of them were either from the South or from the African American diaspora and then moved north. But there wasn't too much like good soul food either. There was some great curry baked chicken from Jamal Wilkes. I think he might be of West Indies descent. But other than that, I'm so glad I live in modern 21st century Los Angeles.
Right.
I have every food at my disposal, and I'm not eating chicken and broccoli casseroles or cheese and broccoli casseroles.
If you could interview one player from the book, not based on like, I love Magic because it's Magic, but one player you'd want to interview from the book, just based on wanting to get to know, like, why the hell did you make that? Like, is there somebody in there you'd pick?
Let me scroll through. There's some interesting ones. Byron Scott, great Lakers shooting guard. He made an omelet a la Scott, which was pretty normal when we talk about the ingredients, except that it was the largest omelet I've ever made. It was physically impossible to fold over. Like, let me read the ingredients. It's 3 eggs, which isn't too weird.
Okay.
But it's 1 full tomato chopped, 6 mushrooms, 6 ounces of cheese, half an onion, half a bell pepper, and it's just impossible to fold over. I'm curious if he was making these every day, or if his wife or like a cook was making these. But in the book, he says that Scott only ate 2 meals a day year-round during his playing days.
Really?
And that Scott, who was kind of known for being a very skinny player, his body gained weight too easily.
Interesting.
So I just want to know more about his metabolism as a fellow skinny guy who can eat like crazy and
I'm jealous.
Weight.
Oh, that sucks. I hate you. That sucks. I eat like 1 bag of pretzels and it's like 5 pounds there. Boom. And that was somebody else you mentioned actually in there being skinny, and it was interesting, was Michael Cooper. And so like, and refresh my memory. I wrote it down. Now, of course, I lost it, but he ate something, and you were talking about like he had like weird eating habits. It sounded like too, and again, like his skinny frame and his. Oh, it was now I'm spacing it out, but it was maybe you have it in front of you, but there was what was Michael Cooper's dish?
Yeah, as I'm reading it right now, so he also was known for being super skin.
Yeah.
And so in the cookbook, it says that he ate a light pregame meal of lean protein, which seems pretty normal for an athlete. But following the game, he ate what was called a midnight feast for a king, which this is what he ate. At midnight after a game, he would eat a nice big steak, 2 baked potatoes, 2 ears of corn, 8 to 10 slices of bread, and then top that off with a quart of milk or a couple of beers.
Jeez.
And then have a quart of ice cream and a slice of apple pie, and then would have some cookies if they're around with some more milk. So Coop was really putting it on to stay at his playing weight of what looked like 170 and at 6'8" or something.
Yeah, right. I know. It's like the defensive specialist. Who knows that? I always find it funny too, like what's going on behind the scenes. That's why I think this is really fascinating too, because like we hear the stories about the Lakers and these teams, but nobody knows what's like going on behind the scenes. So like I think that's cool that you give, even though it's on a food angle, this sort of like this backwards way into their lives of what's going on, which is cool.
Yeah, and the nutritional aspect of pro athletes at that time is really fascinating because, like, I mean, nowadays, of course, the head trainer is like has a master's from UCLA, and there's nutritionists and they have chefs. But back in the 80s, they had a trainer who was a former truck driver until a longtime trainer Gary Vitti took over. The locker rooms were stocked with beer and soda. I mean, no one lifted weights. There was no nutritional thought given to anything. Yeah. It was just like, we hope you guys eat well. We hope you guys stay away from this and that. And still, they managed to be the best team of the 80s, which I think goes to show that nobody was paying attention to nutrition or health.
Which shows you, too, like, if they were to do the 2020 Lakers, it would be so different. And I think the one person that would be the most interesting, because I've heard, like, stories here and there, you probably know more, but like LeBron James and his eating habits. And then, of course, I guess his like love now of red wine with LeBron. Yeah. I think he'd be super fascinating, like the LeBron James pregame meal of like 2 chicken breasts. And then I'm sure like pasta with sauce. And it's like, could not, like he's probably got everything so calculated with the carbohydrate intake, protein intake, vegetable intake. I mean, I'm sure like if you were to recreate this now, it would be so different.
Oh, I know. I mean, I kind of feel almost bad for LeBron. I'm sure his meals are like amazing and delicious, and his cook serves them up like the most amazing stuff.
Right.
But like you said, I'm sure it's just like chicken every single day.
Right.
Maybe a piece of salmon on Friday. It's just like, yeah, and the insane work he puts on his body. I feel bad for him. And you mentioned him drinking all that wine. Whenever I see him drinking wine on IG stories, I'm like, oh no, don't crush a bottle of red, until I realize he's 6'10" and like 250. He's going to be okay.
Yeah, right. His metabolism's working a little different. It's funny too. You say like when I think like the stereotypical like healthy meal, it's like grilled chicken, and then if you behave well, you get salmon, and you get to have that fatty skin, which is good. It's like the like the cliche health meal for the athlete.
I know all these players thought that, I'm sure like LeBron, he was like, July, August, September, those are my cheat months. I get to enjoy myself. I don't have to go into the weight room. And now he spent 3 months, between March and June, still getting in shape just to be prepared for this restart.
And he said after one of these games a few days ago, he was like, we're not in playoff mode yet. You a little anxious about your Lakers right now? And then we don't know exactly who they're playing yet, but like most likely it's going to be Damian Lillard and these Blazers. A little nervous about that 1-8 matchup.
Yeah, to tell you the truth.
Or is it media hype on these Blazers?
No, I mean, look, Damian Lillard he's incredible. I mean, he's one of my favorite players to watch. I'm not too nervous. I mean, this happens a lot in Laker fandom, which is they kind of limp towards the playoffs.
Okay.
Of course, this is a totally different situation. I'll be completely honest. After their first game back against the Clippers, I've kind of tuned out because I knew they're going to take the 1 seed.
Yeah.
I'm more concentrating on the playoffs. That's kind of what I'm more waiting for. So I haven't really watched much of the restart yet. But I'm not too nervous. I mean, they're going to give us some trouble just because they're going to put it on the back of Dame. But I'm not feeling.
I have one other. I have a friend that's in New Jersey, but he's like a Laker fan because he grew up a huge Kobe guy, loved the Lakers, and he had the same answer. It was like, yeah, we'll be fine, we're good. So I like that. I like hearing, like, as a Mets fan, I'm like, no, we'd be dead. I have no confidence in my sports teams. I like hearing from people that have confidence in sports teams. I'm like, what is this? This is cool. Like, I'm so jealous of your cockiness here. It's awesome.
Well, it's a very unearned cockiness. It's just because my two fandoms, which are the Dodgers and the Lakers, just couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
Because with the Dodgers, I'm petrified every time they go to the playoffs, because I'm like, oh my God, they're going to fuck up in the playoffs for like the 8th, 9th year in a row. I mean, I was at Game 7 for the 2017 World Series. Oof. Like, it can't get any worse than that.
Yeah. Well, like, if I say Daniel Murphy, like, you don't like that. Like, that's going to be a no word.
No, it was. But with the Lakers, it's just because growing up, by the time I was 10 or 9, I had already experienced a championship.
Yeah.
By the time I like graduated college, I'd experienced like more than most people experience in their lives. I'm spoiled.
Well, you suck.
It's spoiled. Being a Lakers fan could be very easy at times. So when people stress about the Lakers, I'm talking about my fellow fans.
Yeah.
I kind of roll my eyes because I'm like, guys, I mean, look, I want them to win. I'm going to be really bummed if they lose, but it's really not the end of the world for us.
Right.
We experienced the last 7 years. We almost had Jim Buss take over the team. That would have been much worse.
Yeah, right. Because obviously, when you were thinking about putting this together, you didn't expect a global pandemic to hit and the NBA to stop, and we actually didn't have 82 games. So what was it like during those 3 to 4 months when there was no basketball? And then how did you schedule out when you were going to do your posts?
So let's see. So Rudy Gobert contracted COVID. I think it was like Wednesday, March 10th or something.
Something like that. Yeah, it was early-ish March. That sounds right.
So I always had a few weeks of posts ready in the can in advance, just so I wouldn't have to be like writing and cooking on the day I needed to publish a post.
Sure.
So I had a few posts in the can and I let those go. And then I kind of took like a month off, and it was basically, mid-March to mid-April. There were rumblings that the NBA might do something they might do something in Orlando, but nothing was official. Nothing was anywhere near official yet. So I took about a month off. And then I kind of came back, wrote a post saying, here's the deal. I don't know if they're going to play 82 games, but I'm going to write 82 blog posts anyway, because it'd be incredible. I mean, it would be crushing if I did like 60 of them and then was like,
right.
Oh no. And this was a time where like, I really thought like, wow, I honestly don't think sports are going to come back.
Yeah.
But then by the time they announced the bubble restart, I think it was like June 1st or something, they made it official. I was like, okay, this will even out good. I have 2 months to go. I can, instead of releasing a post for every game, I'll just release one every week. And then it just added up very easily, so that by the day the Lakers and Clippers kicked back the season, I was able to post my 82nd game, which was an interview with Julie Powell, who wrote Julie and Julia.
Oh, so how was that experience talking to her after experiencing what you have done with the blog and with everything you've been doing with all the recipes? What was that like?
Oh, it was super fun. She's really a really funny, really, really, really cool person. It's like, I'm not the first person to have ripped her off. Like, we talked about some of the other crazy blogs she's seen over the past 10 years. There was one guy who watched Julie and Julia every day for 365 days.
So what were his posts like? Different? What did he write about? Like different experience on that day watching the movie?
I guess. I mean, he has a sense of humor. I know that he's a writer for James Corden now, so he has, he's got jokes, but right. I could not subject myself to that. But yeah, no, she was super cool and nice. She doesn't know a thing about sports. She was
perfect.
I was like, did you even, like, when Kobe Bryant died, did that even enter your experience? She's like, yeah, that did. But she was like, yeah, I don't know anything about sports. But it was cool commiserating with someone who had done the same thing I did and had this year-long, I don't want to say, a mix between a process and hell, because sometimes it could get really bad.
Yeah, do you ever feel like knowing you had to make a dish, like just dread that morning? You're like, like, oh my God, I have to do the Kurt Rambis Italian chopped salad tonight. Not that one sounds that terrible, but like we're just like, I don't know if I have this in me tonight.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I did not take into consideration is that I'm sure you feel this way sometimes as a basketball fan, but like, you know, in the doldrums of like late February, you're just like, oh my God, can we get to the playoffs already? Like the season is so long.
Yeah.
And when I'm on like game 50 and I'm writing about like some Lakers super fan who's like a manufacturer who I've never heard of, and I got to figure out a way to write about them, it could get in trouble. And also because I mentioned earlier, I work in TV production. So sometimes I'll have a job for like a month, and then I won't have one for 6 weeks, and then I'll have another one. So sometimes I'm like, phew, I don't have a job. I actually have time to work on Goldstein and Gasol. And then sometimes I'm working and I'm like, oh, I really wish I wasn't making money so I could work on this passion project that cost me money.
That's tremendous. Well, the website's Goldstein and Gasol. I really recommend that everybody check it out. Great information on like Lakers history, of course, documenting what's going on in this season, and then all the food recipes that we have talked about. On the Uber Eats side of thing, you mentioned earlier in the interview about like some nights you try something and you're like, oh God, no, we've got to get some delivery. As a delivery coming to you, Uber Eats, let's say for example, do you have a go-to in LA or a go-to spot in your area you like delivered to your house?
Yeah, actually, to tell you the truth, before the pandemic, I rarely ordered delivery. Just because the fees just add up too much, and I live in Hollywood, so I can walk to so many places and have the car and the subway and everything, yada yada. But one thing I order from Uber Eats or Postmates or whatever a lot is from this local chain called Mendocino Farms. I think it's just a California thing.
Yeah, I've never heard of
it. It's like a fast casual. I don't want to say healthy because that kind of gives a connotation that it's like only like vegan stuff.
Right.
Because they do have like amazing fried chicken and banh mi. But it's kind of like a cliched restaurant that people, when you work in TV production, like if you're a PA, you always have to go get Mendocino Farms for the writers and producers. So having worked in TV a lot, I love their salads. And whenever I'm eating like shit, or I've just been like drinking too much or something the night before and I need something to feel good, I'll order a salad from Mendocino Farms and have it delivered from West Hollywood.
Do you, if you get something ordered to your house, for example, a pizza, burger, I don't know, cliche takeout foods, do you reheat it?
No, I always take into consideration the distance, because if it is, because there's like certain places that are only in a certain part of LA that are really good, but if it's too far and I know it's not going to, it's just not going to travel well. Yeah, I will just skip it or drive there to eat it.
Yeah, no, that's a smart move. I have this. I hate cold food, so if I order something, I'll reheat the shit out of it and ruin it, and I know I'm ruining it, but I just can't help myself. I'm like, no. It's got to be hot. I had a lobster roll once and I reheated it. I'm like, this is the stupidest decision I've ever made. But I was like, it was a buttered lobster roll. So it was supposed to be, the lobster was supposed to be hot, not like your traditional New England style with the mayonnaise and everything. So like, I was like, I'm going to reheat this. And then I was like, that was $30. I fucked up because now I have rubbery lobster, which was a terrible decision by me.
Yeah. And the big thing is when you reheat food, like reheating bread. Well, how do you reheat it? Are you doing microwave or toaster?
It depends on what the item is. Like pizza, I'll make sure that the oven is preheated to a certain temperature. Put it in, ready to go. It just depends on the food. So I would say both to that question.
Yeah, reheating a sandwich almost never works.
No,
it's kind of like the that old McDonald's product from the '80s, the McDLT. Where it had cold items on one side and hot items on the side. Yeah. You could combine them. So it's like, yeah, when I get a sandwich, I just can't I'll put it in the toaster oven, but then the lettuce is hot and the
You're screwed.
Ugh, gross.
You're screwed. How about tipping? Do you tip your delivery drivers? You can be honest. It's a safe space.
Of course. I mean, you have to be a monster not to, especially now.
I did 6 deliveries earlier today, and 5 people did not tip me. It drives me crazy. And then I'm like, what did I do something wrong? Was I slow? Did I like, I can't. And it's one of the things I love doing this because it relaxes me. It's like my drug of like relaxation from my regular job. But that's the one thing that pisses me off. Like, you can't tip me. I don't get that.
Is that normal? Would you say that like 5 out of 6 is like not?
That's bad. That's a bad day. But I would say every 10, 2 to 3 people are not tipping typically.
I mean, unfortunately, it's not surprising, but it's like, I mean, if you have when you order something from like Postmates, like let's say you and a partner order Postmates.
Yeah.
Each thing, I mean, prices here in LA are a little high. So let's say it's like $10 to $12 an item. Then you have the fees. Then you have the delivery charge. It's like if you are already paying basically your meal twice, you can't even throw in like $5.
I know.
You can't even be a cheap tipper and throw in like $3. You can't do anything.
And what they do that's smart is I don't get the notification if I'm going to get a tip or not. It's about like an hour after the drop off. So I can't, an hour later, it's like, you do all these deliveries. You can't remember anything. So you can't like look at the person and like, beforehand and go like, you didn't tip me. Like you don't get that. It's an hour later to keep that safety from the customer to make sure everything's all right.
Right. I know. I miss the old days of like ordering a pizza and you give them a 20 and it's like, oh, here's part of the chain. It's so, I'm sorry. That really bums me out.
Oh, don't be bummed. That's funny. It's, it's interesting too in this pandemic. I had a woman once give me a $5 bill, but she put it in a Ziploc bag because she was like all worried about germs and everything. And it's just so fun. Like just the attitude and how people have changed things with deliveries during this pandemic. Like, here's a $5 in a Ziploc bag. Okay, I'll take it. That's cool. I don't mind.
I'm assuming you were working during like the first month of the pandemic, the first couple months.
Well, actually, I did not, and that's because I ended up getting COVID, so I had to like not be. That's why even like when I do these deliveries too, I'm like, if they knew like 3 months ago I was sick in bed with COVID-19, they'd be like, oh great, thank you so much for your delivery. This is fantastic. Obviously I'm healthy and fine now, but just the psychology of like, oh yeah, your delivery driver had COVID-19 3 months ago, fantastic, but. No, that first month didn't do it just for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I remember very vividly that first month before we knew anything really.
Yeah.
Like, nobody was even wearing masks at the time. And,
right.
It was like we'd go to the grocery store unmasked because it wasn't required. And then we'd come back and like Lysol all of our grocery bags, even though the thing we should have been doing was as simple as putting a cloth on our face. But yeah, wow.
Nah, it's crazy.
Time flies when you're in a worldwide pandemic.
It does. Well, Pablo, I appreciate all your time. There's a couple of questions I end all my podcasts with, and I just ask for your honesty, like complete honesty, and that's it. All right?
Lay it on me.
Waffle or pancake? What do you prefer?
Easy, waffles. Pancakes, I think, is one of the most overrated breakfast foods in the world, mainly because they just fill you up too fast.
So you like the waffle because you get that carb comfort, but you don't get that nasty feeling after. Interesting.
Yeah, well, whether I'm eating like your classic Eggo freezer waffle or I'm like at a nice bougie brunch spot, and I'm getting like a freshly made waffle, I never feel really like stuffed or gross at the end of it. Whereas with one pancake, the second I have a sip of water, I explode like that girl in Willy Wonka.
Right. Oompa Loompas are coming into the diner to carry you out. I like that answer. That's one of the better answers I've had here. All right, this one's very passionate for my wife. She has one that she prefers, and she's repulsed. Repulsed isn't fair, but she's very passionate about this answer. I'm not going to tell you what her thoughts are. That would make this not as fun. Cake or pie?
That's another one I'm very passionate about. And it makes sense because tomorrow is my birthday. I am a big fan of pie over cake for a birthday.
Ooh.
I like cake, and there's of course a lot of variety of cake. Cheesecake, bringing up Jerry West again. I love cheesecake. But your classic birthday cake, I could really take or leave. Whereas pie, just 2 days ago, I was in a Big Bear here in Southern California, and I went to like a local pie shop and had some fresh blueberry pie, and really hit the spot.
See, I don't even know what a Big Bear is. Like, to me, I'm thinking of like you're going to one of those places where you build your own teddy bear. I'm guessing that's not what it is.
No, it's a huge lake resort town in
okay,
like 2 hours east of LA.
That shows how stupid I am. All right, two more for you. Best thing you ate the past 7 days from recording this right now.
Best thing I ate. Oh my god, let me rack my brain for that.
I'm guessing it wasn't like the broccoli cheese casserole. Would probably be your thoughts.
Oh, you know what? This is actually an easy question. Yesterday, on the drive back from Big Bear, we first stopped at McDonald's in Big Bear just to get some large fries because we had a super late lunch. It was like 3:30, and we're like, let's just get some fries because we were then going to travel south to San Bernardino and hit up In-N-Out, which is, I think it's the one thing Californians agree on, no matter what political party, race, age, background. Everyone in California knows In-N-Out is the best.
I've never done In-N-Out. What would be my order first time there? What would I get? What should I get? It's not even taking into account, the secret menu, there really is not much of a big menu. You just got to get the double. Just get a double with fries and, a Coke or a chocolate shake, whatever your preference is. But it's so good, so fresh, so relatively affordable compared to a lot of its competitors like Shake Shack and the likes that are kind of like, or Five Guys who have ripped off their entire aesthetic. But yeah, an In-N-Out double burger yesterday. Tastes exactly as it did when I was like 5. And then the final question, it's a year from now, pandemic, we'll just say it's like more of a normal level, and you're sending out your wedding invitations. Mm-hmm. Do you invite me to your wedding?
Of course, man. Yeah, I got to make up for the Nets losing in 2002 to the Lakers. That'll be my mea culpa.
Fair enough. Well, Pablo, appreciate your time. Goldstein and Gasol, again, is the site. Highly recommend you check it out. Goldstein and Gasol on Twitter and Instagram. Go give Pablo a follow. Thanks for joining the Mike Delivers podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thank you, Pablo, for hopping on the Mike Delivers podcast. I had a blast. That was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And good luck to your LA Lakers in the NBA playoffs. All right, as I promised, if you leave an Apple comment, I will read it. So here we go. This one is from Alex G-S. A great way to relax. 5 stars. Always fun and a great way to relax at the end of the day. This one is from Sports and High Heels, who says, pure comedy from this podcast, 5 stars. Met Mike in the wonderful land of Twitter, and this podcast is hilarious. This one is from AJB59, top notch, ... The dude abides, 5 stars. Just sit back and listen and enjoy. Not sure how Mike doesn't weigh 800 pounds by now, but that's probably a secret for another time. And then one more here on the Apple Podcast comments to read. This one is from MERLELHNELLL. And he writes, Mike delivers 5 stars. I enjoy listening to Mike's stories from the road while I am out and about making my own deliveries. His interviews bring out other ideas and give other perspectives to the show. If you're delivering or interested in becoming a driver, this is a good podcast to listen to on the road. That's me giving you just the tip, an old school portion of this podcast, which will be coming back because with the deliveries amping up, there are tips that I need to give out to everybody. This has been episode 101. Episode number 102 comes out on Thursday. It's McDonald's breakfast this time for breakfast month. And I gotta say, much better than Wendy's. I'll have all the details. My wife and I go back and forth. A lot of fun on episode 102. Don't forget, guys, you want to reach out to me, Mike Delivers Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Feel free to message me there. Also, email me, MikeDeliversPod@gmail.com. That's the way you can get a hold of me if you have food recommendations, just questions. Also, if you're a delivery driver, I'd love to hear your stories like you heard today from Gerald. You heard last week from Jose's sister about dropping off to the wrong house. Love getting more content on the podcast, and it's coming from you guys. I think that really adds to it. So please feel free to reach out to me, and we can set that up. This has been episode 101. Thank you to Gerald for his story. Thank you to Pablo Goldstein for coming on the podcast. And the music you hear is from Beautiful Noise. They are the soundtrack to the Mike Delivers podcast, and it would not be the same without them. This has been episode 101. We'll see you next time for episode 102.